Hello, my name is David Faure and I work for KDAB. In the previous video, we talked about REST. Another very common communication protocol for web services is SOAP. I wrote an open source library called KDSOAP, which implements the SOAP protocol for Qt applications. KDSOAP makes it really easy to do both client-side and server-side for SOAP clients and servers. Because what it does is it starts from the description of the web service, which is all done in a WSDL file. That's a file that is actually offered by the web service with a full description of the API that it offers. It's basically an XML file that KDSOAP can read and generate code from so that we can implement both client and server. And actually, it generates three kinds of APIs, synchronous APIs for clients, asynchronous APIs for clients, and the server API. If we run the application that I want to show you here with KDSOAP, it's actually the same application as the one that I showed in part 2 when explaining the difference between synchronous and asynchronous calls. So now we are going to look at the code for this application. What I found online was a web service that gives us one method, a very simple web service. Given a bank code, it gives us the bank name. So if we download the WSDL file for this service, this is what it looks like, right? This is XML. We start from the bottom here with the service element. It says this service is available under 3 different bindings: SOAP 1.1, SOAP 1.2, and also HTTP, which is actually HTTP post, which is actually less commonly used for SOAP requests and not even implemented in KDSOAP. What is of interest to us is SOAP 1.1 and 1.2. If we look at one of those bindings, like the SOAP 1.1 binding, it defines one operation, which is the getBank operation, basically the getBank method that we can call. And then the rest of the file here is the XML schema for the types being used by this operation for input and output. But it's not really easy to read. What we'll do instead is ask KDSOAP to generate APIs, and then we can read those APIs. That's much more common code that we can understand. So if we do that, we want to go to the directory where the WSDL file is, and we can simply run KD WSDL to CPP, right, the conversion tool. We give it as input the WSDL file, and we want to generate both the header file and the CPP file, and we can do that with the -both command. And once we do that, it is actually expected that we get a warning for the HTTP binding because it's not implemented, but we will use the SOAP 1.1 and SOAP 1.2 bindings, which are actually on top of HTTP, right? It's a little bit confusing, but it's not the very direct and basic HTTP. It's the way SOAP does that. Now, if we have a look at the generated files, I actually have them here. It generates a number of things. There are structs or classes here with these are the types being used. So we just scroll down. What's of interest to us as a starting point is the service class, which is the one that derives from QObject. This is how you can easily find it. In that class, it will have generated some standard methods, and then we start with the actual API that we can call, and it starts here with getBank, right? The operation that we can call with, in this case, a blocking call. So we give it parameters, we get the response. This is a blocking call, very convenient for unit tests, for secondary threads, for non-graphical programs, but this is not what we want to do in a GUI thread. In a GUI thread, we want to use asynchronous calls. You see here some asynchronous call, but I don't recommend using that. This is deprecated API. Instead of that, we want to use a job class, which has all of the benefits of a job class, which is encapsulating a request and the corresponding response so that we know when we get a response, we know what it matches, we know where to find the data for it, and we know which request it came from. Now, how does this look in the actual code? You remember we had 2 buttons, synchronous and asynchronous. For the sync button, what we do is simply call the synchronous getBank method and we get the response, right? Very easy. We can put that in a for loop, very easy to code, but not recommended in the GUI thread. For the asynchronous calls, remember we want to do 10 calls in a row. So we'll do the first one. We create an instance of the job, the getBank job, give it the input parameters, start the job, and connect to the finished signal. In the corresponding slot, the lambda here, we can test for errors, and if there was no error, we get the results and process it. In that method that processes the response, we show it on the screen, update the progress bar, and start the next job, right? And we do that 10 times until we are actually done and we stop the little animation. So that's the asynchronous client using KDSOAP, and you see that it makes it really easy to do both because it generates API for you. You can find in the description a link to the GitHub code for all of KDSOAP, actually, including this example, which is part of it. I hope you enjoyed learning how KDSOAP makes it easy for you to write clients and servers using Qt to do SOAP. But if you'd rather subcontract that work, I'm available for this. I've done quite a number of things around SOAP, including KDSOAP. Just send an email to info@kdap.com, and it's a small company, I'll hear about it. Thank you. Bye-bye.